Hi, good morning. Today we're talking about obsession because I've watched it every Friday for the last 4 weeks and I can't get over how many chances this man had to stop doubling down and just do the right thing. I want to look at every missed opportunity for Bear to make a better choice, break down why he didn't, and how doing nothing instead of doing the right thing brought out the worst version of himself. How? How did he become this person? Well, when I said there were Joes in the world, this is what I meant. Lonely men who avoid growth and introspection by escaping into obsession and then mistake those feelings for love and affection when they're really craving control and possession. So, quick overview. Obsession is a 2026 horror movie following Bear, who has a crush on his coworker Nikki, and despite being unable to admit that he likes her, he makes a wish that Nikki would love him more than anyone in the world, and spoiler, she does. Until Bear can't reciprocate her feelings and the whole thing goes off the rails. But it didn't have to be like this, and there wasn't a single decision but a continued pattern of behavior and cowardice that led Bear down the wrong path and ruined everything for Nikki herself. So we start the story with Bear, which is short for Baron, a low-ranking noble title, but sounds like barren, such as empty or hollow, and I think that this guy starts from a very understandable place. Not a healthy place, it's an emotionally immature and generally aimless place, but Bear is avoiding the uncertainty and responsibility of being an adult by hiding away in his comfort zone, which is something that a lot of people have done whether they recognized it at the time or not. He's living in his grandmother's house that he inherited when she died, and with it came the obligation of caring for her cat Sandy, an unwanted responsibility. Bear didn't necessarily want a cat, he didn't think through what it would mean to have a cat and then decide to get one, it just became his and then existed in the house as something that kept him company after his grandma passed. When it comes to his work and social life, Bear has a few friends and his coworkers, but he sees his job at the music store as just a job. And even though he's skilled at playing the piano and previously wanted to start a band, he doesn't seem to engage with any hobbies outside of work that spark joy. So Bear searches for connection, which is a very human need, and privately starts obsessing over his friend Nikki, which is an unhealthy way to cope with those feelings. When he returns home one day to find that Sandy has died, Bear questions how she got into a bottle of pills, but the thought stops there. He doesn't follow through to the uncomfortable conclusion that acknowledges his own negligence. Instead, he just cries over Nikki not loving him and scrolls through her pictures in bed. For Bear, the idea of Nikki is comforting because she's shown him consideration and kindness, and dreaming about her keeps her at a distance where she doesn't demand any depth. Bear holds on to his memory of Nikki sitting on the phone with him after his grandmother died, but he doesn't think about how they didn't even talk about his feelings, and Nikki was just there as a reassuring presence on the other end of the line. So he wants to combine that comforting feeling with a romantic relationship, but Bear wants validation and love without any risk, or vulnerability, or emotional honesty, or potential for friction, let alone rejection. Oh no, I'll just die if I get rejected. And look, I get it so much, but avoidance is the bad thing. Doing nothing is still doing something, and you can't think yourself into overcoming your anxiety. You just have to do the thing. Even if it doesn't go how you want, that has to be a risk that you're willing to take. Nikki might have feelings for Bear, she might not. It doesn't really matter because when she asks Bear point blank if he likes her, he not only avoids telling her the truth, but he lies and says that they're good as friends. I'm sorry, but the bare minimum to date someone is admitting that you like them. You don't have to be your most perfect self, but you do have to be able to say that you like the person you literally claim to love. Yeah, can we rewind to that for a second? Bear poured his heart out to this waitress, pretending that she was Nikki, and despite being unable to finish half of his sentences, she still reacted very positively. Does that mean that's how Nikki would react? No, not necessarily, but notice how it's Ian who tears him down. He interrupts, tells Bear that his feelings are gross, and dismisses the waitress's opinion as she's trying to be constructive and encouraging toward Bear. And honestly, this script is annoyingly good because Ian starts to say that would freak Nikki out, but he stops before saying Nikki because who really cares about her feelings, and he says that freaked me out instead. Bear does something similar when he plans to get Nikki a new crystal necklace because she just lost hers, but he decides that she would hate it. Why though? That could actually be a thoughtful gift, but he let Ian get into his head. So Bear is too held back by his fear of rejection when he's presented with the chance to be honest about his feelings, which means that he won't get to have the relationship he wants until he does the hard work to overcome— oh wait, never mind. He's gonna skip all of that by wishing that Nikki Freeman loves him more than anyone in the fucking world. Now, does Bear expect the wish to work? One, maybe, maybe not. There was a whole conversation where he was warned and he specifically questioned if people complained because the wish ruined their lives. But two, it doesn't matter if he believes that the wish will work because the intention behind it is the problem here. Bear took the initiative to drive Nikki home and he had the chance to tell her how he felt, but when she asked him directly, he lied to her. And then when he became upset with himself, he didn't wish that he could be honest with Nikki or overcome his own anxiety. Bear turned that feeling into a wish that Nikki would just love him more than anyone else. This guy can't even say that he likes a woman, but he wants her to love him more than anyone in the world. That's unreasonable and misguided. Following the wish, Nikki returns to the car to ask for the gift that Bear mentioned that she previously didn't want, before inviting him inside to have a few more drinks after she specifically said she wanted to go home and sleep. Bear might not know that magic is real, but he knows that something is up. He looks back at the One Wish Willow because he recognizes the change in Nikki's behavior and he's searching for an explanation. She gets mixed up, claiming that she lost her cat and acts so out of character that Bear suggests that she's drunk. Cue the first opportunity to just fucking leave. Nikki snaps back to herself for a second, recognizing that she's acting so weird, but Bear is just too confused to react. She gets in his car to go back to his place, and Bear resists at first, saying she should go inside and they'll talk in the morning. But when Nikki cries about her dad dying, he supposedly has no choice but to take her home because she doesn't want to be alone. So, okay, this is already becoming questionable, not because Bear is actively trying to take advantage of Nikki, but because he's passively accepting the advances of somebody that he knows to be drunk, upset about her dad, and not acting like herself so much that it was already freaking him out. Forget magic. Bear just told Nikki that they were good as friends, she agreed and said good, and 20 minutes later she's taking off her shirt and kissing him. That behavior doesn't make sense, and Bear kissing Nikki back is still taking advantage of that. Is he doing the absolute worst thing that he could be doing? No, I guess not. But does that mean that what he's doing is okay? Well, also no. It's like how Joe exploits comparison, differentiating himself from bad men to justify what he does based on his belief in love. So the real Nikki screams and jumps away from the bed, presenting another opportunity for Bear to realize what he's doing is wrong. But just like the excuse about her sick, dying father, Bear accepts Nikki's explanation that she had a panic attack. Of course, it stands out what Bear says here.
Shit, you made me feel like I did something you didn't like.
You made me feel like I did something, like she's responsible for his emotions. But Bear, ever the gentleman, lays on the floor instead of sleeping in the bed with Nikki because that would be messed up, until he can't stop thinking about the One Wish Willow and searches online to see if it works. So Bear is still looking for an explanation for Nikki's behavior because he knows that it's not adding up. But instead of going to sleep on the couch, he returns to the bedroom where Nikki asks if he'll lay with her and Bear hesitates but gives in. Rest in peace to any semblance of their friendship as Nikki digs Bear's dead cat out of the garbage to create a memorial in the kitchen, and he completely overlooks the fact that she forgets what words mean. As if last night wasn't weird enough, Bear tells Nikki the display is fucked up, and she asks if that's good. Why would that be good? Exactly, Bear. Why would the Nikki that you've known for 7 years think that this is something good? Well, he can't ask himself that question because it could lead to the conclusion that something isn't right, which could mean that what he's doing is wrong. They head to work together where Bear tells Ian about his terrifying night with Nikki, describing her crazy behavior and suggesting that she's going through something. But then he lies to Ian so casually and without missing a beat. Bear says that Nikki wanted him to sleep with her, and when Ian asks if he did, he says, "No, I slept on the floor." But that's not quite true. Bear might have started on the floor, but when Nikki asked him to join her in the bed, he did, and the fact that he readily misleads Ian tells me that he knows it wasn't the right thing to do. But Bear is dismissing what he knows for what he wants, and honestly, the way that he's presenting the situation to Ian, like he was just so confused by Nikki's behavior, is incredibly performative. He could just talk to Nikki, but instead he's talking to Ian to really express how confused and terrified he was by the whole situation, how he was practically a victim to this woman acting psychotic and suggesting that she needs serious help. They conclude that Nikki must have been on Molly, which Ian confirms when he gives her a ride home, but then she shows up at Bear's house to apologize for her behavior, which was because of the drugs, and profess her feelings for him, which aren't because of the drugs, but actually have been around since Christmas. That's incredibly convenient. And while the whole "I'm not saying you took advantage of me" completely goes over his head, Bear finally admits that he has feelings for Nikki after she presents the question in a way that basically guarantees success. So sure, Nikki's not on drugs now as far as Bear knows, but if he didn't know she was on drugs last night, then how does he know she's not on drugs now? And if being upset about her father was also a factor, shouldn't that still matter? Well, not to Bear it doesn't, so they hook up and Nikki starts spending every minute by his side both at work and at home. A drastic overnight change in her behavior that Bear gets more and more comfortable acting like he doesn't notice. Because he's not doing anything wrong, you see. It's not like he's holding her hostage, she's the one who came to him. But that's the bullshit of it. He knows that something is up, but it's easy to insulate himself in excuses to avoid any challenge to his self-perception. Until the dinner date scene, when the couple are out in public and Ian calls to tell Bear that Nikki's dad isn't even sick. Ian accuses Nikki of having ill intentions or something mental going on, and he calls out how strange it is that she snapped into a different person who is suddenly obsessed with Bear. Which means he can't really deny it anymore since somebody else is questioning him, so Bear confirms with Nikki that she loves him more than anyone in the world and then tries to ask about her dad. She freaks out because she's lying and causes a scene, asking Bear, why does it matter? Again, this is another opportunity to think through the question presented.
Then why does it matter?
It matters because she lied. It matters because good relationships require honesty. It matters because that was her excuse to go back to Bear's that first night when she was acting completely unlike herself. But he doesn't want to think through any of that, so he says that it doesn't matter and takes Nikki home to have sex with her. While I expect that this is how Bear would have sex anyway, the way that his head is buried, not even looking at Nikki, demonstrates the extent of his disregard for her. As much as the audience knows that Nikki is going through hell as she's possessed by the wish, Bear doesn't see it that way. He chooses not to see it at all. Until he rolls over and it starts to dawn on him how empty the experience probably felt compared to what he had imagined. As it would, because that was fucked up, and crossing that line triggers the deterioration of their relationship starting that night. Nikki stands in the corner like she wants to get away from Bear, but the wish is keeping her in the room to watch him. Of course he doesn't like it and gets upset with Nikki freaking him out again, so when she comes back with flowers for Sandy and climbs back into bed, he tries to slip away. Because Bear wants the freedom to leave when he's uncomfortable. Oh, now he can leave the room now that he doesn't want to sleep in the bed with her? Interesting. But too bad, because Nikki won't let him go, shouting at Bear to stay! The following morning, before he leaves for work, Bear tries to talk to Nikki about her behavior during the night, and she apologizes, distracts him with her advances, and promises not to do any more weird stuff. And to be fair, she had already duct taped the front door closed before she made that promise. Bear manages to get it open, which I don't think would be possible if this had been done for real, and he spends his lunch break with Sarah, eating the sandwich that Nikki made him with meat from his dead cat. This guy wants to be a food critic while he's so disconnected from his taste buds that it doesn't even register that he's eating rotten dead meat. Okay. When Sarah grabs the note that Nikki sent and asks Bear what it means by "what's the verdict, cat," I got annoyed that she asked the question so many times, like, can we just think about what words mean for a second? Then I realized it was another instance of posing the question to Bear. What does it mean that Nikki, a functional human adult, would do something as insane as bring back the dead cat, again, to cook for his lunch? What the fuck could that really mean? Even if we don't believe in magic, doesn't that seem concerning? Well, you would think so, but there are more pressing matters when Ian confronts Bear over his relationship with Nikki, saying that it looks like he's taking advantage of her going through something. That's what Ian is worried about, the perception of what's happening, so I can see where Bear gets it. He does challenge Bear, laying out the timeline of his relationship with Nikki, and he's not wrong, but Bear's not interested in breaking down his relationship and changes the subject to Ian not inviting him and Nikki to his party. And here's the thing, while Ian is worried about what people would think, he offers for Bear to prove that he's not in a codependent relationship with Nikki by coming to the party alone. But hold on, if Nikki is the one who's going through something, doesn't she deserve the support of her friends? If we think that Bear's taking advantage of her, aka doing something wrong, then why is he still invited to the party? Shouldn't we be trying to get Nikki away from him so we can check in on her? I guess Ian might not want to do that because he was sleeping with Nikki, so now that she's all over Bear, he has no use for her, so he doesn't want her around, just like the waitress they used as a stand-in. Bear plans to talk to Nikki about not cooking the cat, a conversation that he shouldn't have to have, and put his foot down about going to the party alone, because he wants her to love him more than anyone in the world, but he also wants the freedom to do whatever he pleases while she gets left at home. Yeah, that seems totally fair, Bear. Totally fair. Before heading inside to the horrible scene that is waiting for him, Bear calls the support line for the One Wish Willow to see if he can alter his wish. He doesn't want to free Nikki and give her back her autonomy, he just wants more control over how she loves him. Of course, he can't do that and learns that his only options are to kill himself to end the wish or accept the obligation of being there for Nikki. And this man does not have it in him to do either of those things, frantically hanging up as the real Nikki screams in agony through the phone. Bear enters the house to find Nikki having made a mess all over herself while she did nothing but stand and wait for him to return home, because she loves Bear more than anyone, including herself, which means neglecting her own bodily needs as she's possessed by her fixation on him. And this still isn't enough for Bear to step up and give a fuck. He asks if Nikki had a seizure, as if that would make sense and explain everything, and she realizes that Bear is grossed out with her, so she rushes away apologetically to clean herself up in the shower for him. Bear confronts her through the door about cooking the cat like the coward that he is, and when he tries to say that he's going to Ian's for A Boy's Not Alone, Nikki screams and argues that Sarah said she was going, so Bear tells Nikki that he actually really wants her to come. When they show up to the party, Ian accuses Bear of letting Nikki guilt him into bringing her, as if she's the one with the power here, and her behavior is such a cry for help that it makes me want to scream. From the story that she reads to the way that she physically moves Sarah to take her place next to Bear and then makes melodramatic proclamations about her love, Nikki is acting crazy enough to garner more than a measly, "Nikki, are you okay?" But nobody wants to step up. The real Nikki breaks through, desperate for anyone to help, and nobody does anything until she starts literally hurting herself and everyone yells for Bear to take her to the hospital. But why? Why are we turning to the person who we think is taking advantage of Nikki to be the one to take responsibility for her? Because it's easy. He's her boyfriend, so let him deal with her. I think Bear tries to drop Nikki off at the hospital, but she won't go in by herself, so he just takes her home, where he ends up yelling at her because everything was so normal, but how she's acting isn't okay. He finally questions if she likes him and asks if she's happy, if Nikki is happy, and she responds by declaring,
I'm your freaky Nikki.
and how amazing is that to illustrate exactly how much she is in herself? Bear turns away from her, knowing this and not wanting to face it, and Nikki demands that he say he loves her. Bear stares at her, claiming that this was all he ever wanted, but it's not. What he wanted was love and connection and emotional support, and he convinced himself that a relationship with Nikki would give him that, but it won't, since he couldn't offer it in the first place, and whether he meant to or not, his wish has left Nikki trapped. So it's basically impossible for her to accept his suggestion that she go home for a night because she's bound by the wish to be obsessed with him. He wants her to love him more than anyone, but also leave whenever he wants, despite the relationship robbing her of having a life of her own. Bear is feeding Nikki contradicting commands and then getting upset at the result. He demands that she be normal and act like Nikki, but Nikki wouldn't be here in his house right now. So be here for me, but give me space whenever I need it, and be normal, be like Nikki, and also love me more than anything in the world. It reminds me of a text that I got from my boyfriend at the time that I kept for way too long, where he went off on me like, just be normal, be happy, be social, stop hurting yourself, stop being insecure, stop getting jealous, just going on, listing all of these things that he took issue with and wanted me to change. Not for me, but for him. So Nikki's desperation for validation is painful to watch because the whole I can be normal thing is so real. But Bear finally realizes that her love isn't, and she glitches out, freaking him out for the millionth time, so he suggests that she sleep in the bed alone while he heads to Ian's, and Nikki threatens to kill herself. Having Nikki here with him was all that Bear thought that he wanted, and now it's making him want to be anywhere else. But he stays to avoid that messy outcome and lays awake in bed until Sarah texts him at almost 3 a.m. in the morning. So far, I've held my tongue about Sarah, but screw that. You don't text someone else's boyfriend in the middle of the night, especially not after what happened at the party. Bear the insufferable agrees to meet up with her, but he's stopped on his way out when the real Nikki begs him to kill her. Between my first and second watch of this movie, I thought about this scene believing that Bear had his back turned the whole time, but no, he is actually facing the sleeping being in his bed while talking to Nikki's disembodied voice. He does avert his gaze, looking down as he argues with her about who she really is, and resentfully asks what would be so bad about being with him, but there's not even a speck of plausible deniability left as he turns to leave a pleading Nikki to go and meet with the woman that she already took issue with just a few hours ago. Did we forget about that already? When Bear joins Sarah in her car, her first question is about what's going on with Nikki, and he lies to her, saying that Nikki's dad is sick and she's having a hard time with it. 1, he knows that this isn't true, and 2, Sarah immediately questions it as somebody who isn't trying to get something out of Nikki might be inclined to do. But Bear doubles down on his dishonesty, insisting that Nikki is close with her dad now, and Sarah criticizes Nikki, saying that it's not right for her to be taking advantage of him. Which is crazy enough as it is, knowing all that we know, but it's worse when you consider why Bear has sleeping pills in his pocket. Sarah admits that Nikki and Ian have been casually hooking up for years and says that it's a shame Bear's with Nikki because he needs someone more chill. And I know she doesn't see Bear how we do, but that's pathetic. You feel competitive over this guy? That's embarrassing. So Nikki shows up and kills Sarah and then comforts Bear in the passenger seat, telling him that this is all his fault, reminding him that he wanted this and he wished for it. Sorry, did I say comforts? I meant confronts. And I don't even feel bad for the guy because technically he could still call the police and accept the consequences, but he doesn't do that. Instead, Bear helps Nikki move Sarah's dead body and then leaves her at the music store to handle the rest on her own. He opens Sarah's admission letter that's soaked in her blood to find that she got accepted to her dream school, and I guess he feels bad about it because he screams at his car, finally showing some emotion besides terrified, so at least he's not as ambivalent to getting Sarah killed as he has been to everything he's been doing to Nikki. But don't be fooled by his outburst, Bear hasn't really learned anything, and you know how I know? Because he returns to the store to buy another One Wish Willow. As Bear is panicking, the shopkeeper suggests that he could ask Nikki to make a wish that contradicts his wish, and since it's for him, she just might do it. Yeah, right. And also reminds Bear that he could just kill himself to free her. Well, he's not going to do that as long as he can avoid it, so Bear opens another One Wish Willow to try and wish that Nikki Freeman only loved him as a friend. Excuse me? First of all, how annoying and dumb for Bear to think that he can make another wish because he so deeply doesn't respect the magic of it that he thinks the rules won't apply to him. And second, fuck this guy. Only loved me as a friend, so he still wants her to love him, just in a particular way that doesn't interfere with his life now that he realizes he doesn't want her. Obviously, it doesn't work because you only get one wish, and dumber by the day Baron decides to visit his good buddy Ian to use his wish to undo Bear's. But Ian doesn't believe him as Bear's own excuses have destroyed his credibility, so Ian wastes his wish asking for $1 billion, which starts falling from the ceiling? Is there just a money cloud in the living room? I'll bet it sucks for Bear to not be believed, but now's not the time to develop any self-awareness as he frantically returns home to ask Nikki to undo his original wish, because he just doesn't realize there's no reality where that would happen. Unfortunately, he finds Sarah's body splayed out on display in the kitchen, and Nikki approaches from the darkness of a corner, covered in blood and hastily drawn tattoos, and she pulls a gun from between her legs, climbing on top of Bear and threatening to kill herself right in front of him. Ian shows up, yelling through the door that he got $1 billion and confirming the magic is real as if Bear wasn't literally there when it happened, and when he bursts in, Nikki shoots him and then throws up on Bear. So he tells her that he loves her and she demands that he scream it, so he does, which calms her down for the moment. Bear reassures Nikki that he's going to make things work, and she reminds him that he owes her that much because he did wish her into this. But oops, he doesn't actually mean any of it. Bear says that they should get cleaned up as an excuse to lock Nikki out of the bathroom and try and kill himself to get away from her. I really don't think he's motivated by anything but avoiding the obligation. He considers shooting himself but settles for overdosing on the oxycodone that he still hasn't cleaned out of the cabinet, and even that isn't something he can commit to as he tries to purge and undo it. But just as he grabs the trash can to puke, ominous music plays outside and Nikki snaps the final one-wish willow, which overtakes Bear and draws him out of the bathroom. Wish-possessed Nikki gets a moment of bliss as Bear finally loves her as much as she loves him before he collapses and dies in her arms. While the real Nikki is finally freed from the original wish, she returns to her life just in time to face the consequences of everything that freaky Nikki did. The movie ends with Nikki crying on the couch, surrounded by the dead bodies of her friends and all of the trauma that she endured at Bear's hand. So that sucks, and Bear sucks, and I can't help but recognize in the story some of the same behaviors that I've talked about in regard to You, where Joe sucks. It seems to me that Bear is just Joe Goldberg in a different font. Take away his romanticized inner monologue, and suddenly we can see this kind of guy for what he really is, and what he's not. I can easily imagine a version of Obsession from Bear's perspective where he's given his own unreliable narrative to explicitly dismiss his suspicions and anchor every decision in how it emotionally impacts him. Bear's behavior in this movie feels like it can compare directly to the way that Joe moves through seasons 2 and 3, building up a type of plausible deniability based on an intangible belief, maintaining his self-image by simply not thinking about what he's doing, and insulating himself in his own perspective and priorities so much that he becomes trapped because he's incapable of seeing things for what they really are. While Joe has the benefit of his narration to actively mislead the audience into sympathizing with him, Bear doesn't have that, so we get to see his behavior for what it is, even if it's passive by contrast. When Nikki first starts acting weird and Bear looks to the one-wish willow, he would question if the wish could have worked, but dismiss the ridiculous suggestion that magic could be real. He might acknowledge that Nikki is drunk in order to justify taking her home so nothing bad would happen, but decide that she must have sobered up by the time that she starts coming on to him. With Nikki as the one making the advances, Bear would talk up his romantic feelings while appearing to be hesitant but ultimately unable to resist her in the end. So they'd have their cozy little fling for a while until he's forced to question her about her father, and then he'd excuse away Nikki's lie to avoid what it really says about her. The post-date sex scene would play out differently as well. Instead of seeing it as it is, it would be framed like Bear is finally lucky enough to be with the woman of his dreams, and Nikki's moans in the background would cover for the lack of seeing her expressionless face on screen. When the relationship starts to deteriorate, it wouldn't have anything to do with what Bear did, but because Nikki herself is crazy, and poor little Bear will consider himself the victim who's trapped in a relationship with some psycho who is just tricking him into believing that she was kind and carefree. In those conditions, it would be totally fine that he wants out, justified even, once freaky Nikki reveals her true self, and Bear's overdose in the end would be grossly misrepresented, cutting from him taking the pills to dying in Nikki's arms, specifically omitting his attempt to undo it as if he's acting noble by sacrificing himself to free Nikki from the wish that he never meant. In the opposite way, You gives us glimpses of the real Joe, turning the show into a horror whenever his narration is removed and we're left to see him from his victim's point of view. The disregard he shows for Marianne as he's abducted her to be locked in the cage is chilling, but just like Bear having sex with Nikki, it's not so different from what he's already been doing. So I'm fascinated by the audience reactions to Bear versus Joe because I know they're different genres and the experience of you is very influenced by the unreliable narrator, but it's still so interesting to see play out online. I am hoping that in time, more people will start to understand that Bear taking the steps to become who he does and how he doesn't think that he's doing anything wrong can be applied to other kinds of compromises that people make in their lives, and the way that sometimes we normalize a disregard for something because it's easy and allows us to continue indulging in comfort and avoidance. Because avoiding the hard work of recognizing a problem in your behavior and doing something about it is so much broader than this one situation. I think what can get lost in the way that I talk about Joe is how much I do understand the way that he feels because I turn around and criticize his actions. But that's the thing here. It's not wrong to experience the fear of rejection and anxiety over the unknown and aversion to any sort of discomfort. I feel that stuff all the time, but how you behave in response to those feelings is what defines who you are right now. And both Bear and Joe respond to those feelings in the wrong ways. As differently as they act on the surface, with Joe actively committing murders and stalking his victims while Bear passively accepts the opportunity presented to him, they both engage in a continual disregard for the object of their attention. Remove Joe's biased narration and consider the story from an outside perspective, and he's just as horrifying in his behavior as Bear, obsessing over women despite not really seeing them, and pursuing a relationship to avoid the emptiness of his own life. So how interesting is it to compare Bear to Joe when Joe differentiates himself from men like Ron and Ryan? Wouldn't Bear reject seeing himself like Joe, like he rejects seeing his actions for what they are? I think there's a compulsion from the audience to try and distance themselves from Bear in the same kind of way, pushing him away as this evil guy who was just looking for his chance to strike, and I take issue with that because I think that defining Bear as a bad guy from start to finish like it was destined and inevitable just contributes to the bullshit by perpetuating the idea that there are good people and bad people, instead of recognizing the uncomfortable reality that there are just people, and every one of those people has the potential to become the worst version of themselves in the right circumstances and the wrong headspace. That's the horror of this movie for me, and that's something that I feel is being overlooked by the hyperfixation on the post-dinner scene. If you can only recognize that Bear's doing something wrong when he literally has sex with Nikki after confirming that she's affected by the wish, then you might be missing the greater point, because every step that led here is what enabled him to be the kind of person to even do this to his friend. It reminds me of this time when this guy picked me up while I was drunk in the middle of the day, and I think we even stopped to buy me more alcohol because I was still drinking, he was enabling, and then we went back to his house, and you can probably guess what happened once he had a drunk girl in his bed. So he said something to me sometime later, and I responded in a way that I didn't recall what he was talking about, and I think that gave him pause, because then he had to consider if he had done something wrong, because somehow the intangible, unknowable difference between blackout drunk and really, really, really drunk would recontextualize what happened. But why? Every step leading up to it was the same. The fact that I was wasted in the middle of the day was readily apparent, and that guy still took a drunk girl that he didn't even like back to his house to hang out. So why is it only after the fact that this invisible differentiation would matter? Especially when he could choose to not believe it and just think that I was lying to make him feel bad. That guy probably didn't think he was a bad guy for that, just like Bear doesn't think that he's a bad guy for what he's doing with Nikki. Plenty of people who think that they're good people do bad things because they think they're good people and not bad people, so it's okay. So maybe this whole good guy, bad guy dichotomy is the problem, which actually shields men who do bad things from seeing it that way because they aren't quote unquote bad guys. Maybe the general audience response to characters nowadays, which focuses only on who they should root for or who they should hate, completely misses the point of the story being told. And that's not a defense of Bear because there is no defense of Bear. As a fictional character, he's written to make the wrong choices. And while I can personally relate to this character's feelings, as far as I'm concerned, the significance of the story is recognizing each of those choices and how they enable the next one, not just trying to spot the moment when he suddenly obtains villain status or write him off for his initial unhealthy obsession. The way I see this movie is like a version of I fucked up so you don't have to, putting a fictional character through a situation where he gets exactly what he wished for, only for it to reveal that the problems in his life were coming from inside himself. And I don't want to hear anyone be like, oh, so you have to watch movies to learn right from wrong? Because yeah, kind of, that's part of the point of movies, is to explore a story and its themes and characters and their decisions to understand different perspectives that you wouldn't think about otherwise. I feel like so many people want to watch things with their brain turned off because they're stressed from work or trying to escape an unfulfilling life, and and just react to what's happening on screen without ever having to think about what any of it means. But isn't that what Bear is doing? Isn't that what this cautionary tale is about? Being so set on what you want out of something that you don't bother to see it for what it is, and then becoming trapped in the escalating consequences of that tunnel vision that make it more and more costly to right the ship? That's the way I see it as somebody who's been through it and had to find my way back to myself. But I only survived that time of my life because I had parents who wouldn't let me die, so I can't help but want better support systems for everyone else. I do feel sympathy for Bear at the start of the story. He's a lonely young person with his whole life ahead of him, but once he makes the wish and he's given a shortcut to get what he wants without any work, he falls victim to his own unaddressed flaws. You know, the ones that he didn't want to work on? I guess the moral of the story is be careful what you wish for because cheaters never win. Right? Something like that? I don't know. Let me know what you think down in the comments because I never get any comments anymore. What's going on? We're trying to talk about stuff here. Leave a comment, like, and subscribe. Thanks. Oh, and if you haven't already, go check out You From Lost Perspective. It's nearly 2 whole hours of awesome. I put my goddamn heart and soul into it, and considering what we've talked about here, it feels kind of relevant.